Everything you've been taught about colour theory is wrong. It makes colour seem way harder than it needs to be. But after helping thousands of artists overcome their confusion, I've developed a much easier way to see and mix perfect colours. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 3 key properties of colour you need to know, the core principle behind them all, and 3 simple exercises that will finally enable you to master colour. Colour might be the most confusing thing about painting from life. We see an endless variety of colours, and with so many pigments to choose from, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. To make sense of all this, artists have developed numerous theories. One of the most popular is the Munsell colour system, created by the American artist Alfred Henry Munsell. Munsell wanted a clear scientific way to talk about colour, so he broke colour down into 3 separate parts: hue, the type of colour, like red, blue or green; value, how light or dark a colour is; and chroma, how strong or dull a colour is. Munsell used a numbered system to describe these properties, a bit like using notes to write music. For example, 5R69 would be a certain red that's medium light and very strong. But just like musical notes alone won't let you play a piece of music, you still need to practice your instrument. Complicated charts and numbers won't teach you how to actually see colour. To truly master colour, you need to understand how colours behave in relation to each other. And that's exactly what limited palettes help you achieve. The 3 limited palettes I'm about to show you are all taken from the foundation course on my new program to master realistic painting in just 90 days. You'll find a link below. The first and most important colour relationship we need to understand is light and dark, what Munsell called value. Light and dark describes the 3-dimensional form of an object. When we paint from life, we're not actually painting the objects in front of us. We're painting the light that falls on them. Recognizing these tonal values is even more important than drawing, because light and dark creates the shapes we're supposed to be drawing. Munsell's system uses a scale of 10 different tones, from black, value 0, to white, value 10. Students often practice by mixing these value scales and then trying to match them precisely to their subjects. But if you jump straight into trying to match exact tones from a 10-step scale, you'll quickly get lost. All value scales are helpful for is learning to mix paint. They won't teach you the most critical skill in painting: simplification. Before you worry about all the subtle differences in tone, you first need to simplify what you see into just a few main tones. The best way to develop this skill is by practicing with a monochrome palette made up of just 2 colours, a dark pigment and white. You can use any dark colour like raw umber, ivory black or ultramarine blue. Start by choosing a strongly lit subject that makes it easy to see the lights and the shadows. Traditionally, artists use plaster casts because their white surfaces clearly show how light and dark tones create 3-dimensional form. If you don't have any plaster casts, just use simple white objects like this still life with a cup and an apple. First, simplify your subject into just 2 main tones, the lights and the shadows. Once you've clearly separated these, you can then identify a few additional tones, like the midtones in between the shadows and the lights, the highlights and possibly dark accents. Aim for around 3 to 5 main tones in total. Sticking to just a few main tones helps you clearly see the big relationships without getting overwhelmed. Once you've established the larger tones, you can gradually add the subtle tones in between to refine the form further. In painting, it's absolutely essential to establish the larger value relationships right at the start. That way, when you add the subtle tones later, you can easily determine if they're lighter or darker compared to the main tones. But once you've clearly established these value relationships, the next question is, what colour do we make them? The human eye can perceive millions of different colours. To make sense of them all, artists normally use a colour wheel divided into primary and secondary colours. Munsell wanted a numbered system, so his colour wheel consists of 5 principal colours and 5 intermediate colours. Personally, I find this incredibly complicated. What if there was a much simpler way to think about colour? Fortunately, there is. A wise artist once said, All you need to know about colour is there are warm colours and cool colours. What they meant by this is that all colours share a single property we can use to compare their relationships, their temperature. On a colour wheel, colours become warmer as they move towards red and cooler as they move towards blue. If we take a colour in the middle of the wheel, like yellow, we can have a warmer version that leans towards orange and a cooler, greener version that contains more blue. But watch what happens if I take the cooler yellow and place it next to a green. It now appears warmer. All you really need to remember is that colours are either warmer or cooler, more red or more blue, in relation to the other colours in your painting. It took me years to truly understand colour temperature. My teachers always spoke about warm and cool colours, but never clearly explained how to actually see and compare them. The way I finally learned to compare temperature relationships was through practical experience using what's called the limited temperature palette. This is similar to the monochrome palette, but instead of just one dark pigment, it uses two: a warm colour like burnt sienna or transparent oxide red, and a cool colour ultramarine blue. Now, instead of just thinking about whether a colour is lighter or darker, you also ask yourself if it's warmer or cooler, more brown or more blue. Let me show you exactly how this works with a still life painting of some eggs. After separating the lights from the shadows, I'll first identify the warmest and coolest notes in my subject. In this case, the warmest colour is the light side of the eggs and the coolest colour is the light side of the bowl. For the eggs, I'll start with transparent oxide red mixed with white. But this is too warm on its own, so I'll cool it down slightly with a small amount of blue. So we're essentially creating warmer and cooler greys, which help establish realistic colour relationships. Once I've clearly established the warmest and coolest colours, I can use them to judge the temperature of the colours in between. For example, the foreground colour is cooler than the eggs, but it's warmer than the bowl. The limited temperature palette is also really convenient for mixing flesh colours. Here you can see a portrait I painted using it. It's amazing how realistic colours can appear just by matching the temperature relationships. Next, we have the colour relationship that beginners struggle with the most. How often have your colours ended up as a muddy mess? This usually happens when you lose control of their intensity, what Munsell called chroma. Chroma is one of the hardest things to get right because the intensity of a colour depends entirely on its relationship to the other colours around it. The same colour can appear bold and bright in one painting, yet muted and neutral in another. Very few colours in nature are as intense and pure as colour straight out of the tube. One of the most common mistakes beginners make is mixing colours that are far too bright when they really need to be greyer and more neutral, like flesh colours that turn out too pink or orange, or landscapes with greens that are unnaturally vivid. To avoid this, we need to learn to control the intensity of our mixtures, and the best way to practice this is by using the High Chroma palette, a limited palette made up of intense versions of the three primary colours plus white: cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. Here I'm using it to paint a lemon. I'm starting with pure lemon yellow for the light side of the lemon, but as you can see, it's much too bright and intense. So I'm gradually going to decrease its intensity by adding small amounts of red and blue. You neutralise a colour by mixing in some of its complementary, the opposite colour on the colour wheel. In this case, the complementary of yellow is violet, a mixture of red and blue. When painting from life, you rarely need to use pure colour straight out of the tube, so most of your mixtures will contain different amounts of all three primary colours. Using intense chromatic versions of the three primaries lets you mix a wide range of bright colours, but it makes mixing greys and neutral colours more challenging. Here I'm using the High Chroma palette for a portrait, and I'm struggling to mix the muted skin tones. Because each pigment is so intense, even a tiny amount can dramatically shift the mixture. For example, when I try adding blue to neutralize a light skin tone, it quickly becomes too cool and green. Mixing flesh tones becomes much easier if you use more neutral versions of the primaries, like yellow ochre or ivory black instead of ultramarine blue. But learning to mix colors with the high chroma palette is fantastic practice. It will teach you how pigments interact with each other and how all colors can be created from the three primaries. Once you understand these essential relationships, it becomes really easy to substitute colors or expand your palette. No color exists on its own. It only exists in a relationship to other colors, as part of a whole. The real secret to mastering color lies in understanding these relationships: value, temperature, and intensity. And the most effective way to master these relationships isn't by mixing endless color charts. It's by practicing with the three limited palettes I've just shown you. If you'd like to see the full versions of the exercises in this video, they're all part of my program to master realistic oil painting in just 90 days. There's a link below. So in just one short video, I've pretty much told you everything you need to know about color. The next essential step is learning how to place your colors in exactly the right proportions. Watch this video next to find out how.